Chapter 11, Buildings, Paintings and Books. The Iron Pillar. The Iron Pillar at Mehrauli, Delhi is a remarkable example of the skill of Indian craftspersons. It is made of iron 7.2 meter high and weight over 3 tons. It was made about 1500 years ago. We know the date because there is an inscription on the pillar mentioning a ruler named Chandra, who probably belonged to the Gupta dynasty. Chapter 10. What is amazing is the fact that the pillar has not rusted in all these years. Buildings in brick and stone. The skills of our craftspersons are also apparent in the buildings that have survived, such as stupas. The word stupa means a mound. While there are several kinds of stupas, round and tall, big and small, these have certain common features. Generally, there is a small box placed at the center or heart of the stupa. This may contain bodily remains such as teeth, bone, or ashes of the Buddha or his followers, or things they used, as well as precious stones and coins. This box, known as a relic casket, was covered with earth. Later, a layer of mud brick or baked brick was added on top, and then the dome-like structure was sometimes covered with carved stone slabs. Often a path known as the Pradakshina path was laid around the stupa. This was surrounded with railings. Entrance to the path was through gateways. Devotees walked around the stupa in a clockwise direction as a mark of devotion. Both railings and gateways were often decorated with sculpture. Find Amravati on map 7. This was a place where a magnificent stupa once existed. Many of the stone carvings for decorating the stupa were made about 2000 years ago. Other buildings were hollowed out of rock to make artificial caves. Some of these were very elaborately decorated with sculptures and painted walls. Some of the earliest Hindu temples were also built at this time. Deities such as Vishnu, Shiva and Durga were worshipped in these shrines. The most important part of the temple was the room known as the Garbhagriha, where the image of the chief deity was placed. It was here that priests performed religious rituals and devotees offered worship to the deity. Often, as at Bhitargaon, a town known as the Sikara was built on top of the Garbhagriha to mark this out as a sacred place. Building sikaras required careful planning. Most temples also had a space known as the mandap. It was a hall where people could assemble. Find Mahabalipuram and Aihole on map 7. Some of the finest stone temples were built in these towns. Some of these are shown here. How were stupas and temples built? There were several stages in building a stupa or a temple. Usually kings or queens decided to build these as it was an expensive affair. First, good quality stone had to be found, quarried and transported to the place that was often carefully chosen for the new building. Here these rough blocks of stone had to be shaped and carved into pillars and panels for wall, floors and ceilings, and then these had to be placed in precisely the right position. Kings and queens probably spent money from their treasury to pay the craftspersons who worked to build these splendid structures. Besides, when devotees came to visit the temple or the stupa, they often brought gifts which were used to decorate the buildings. For example, an association of ivory workers paid for one of the beautiful gateways at Sanchi. Among the others who paid for decorations were merchants, farmers, garland makers, perfumers, smiths, and hundreds of men and women who are known only by their names, which were inscribed on pillars, railings, and walls. So when you get a chance to visit any of these buildings, remember how several hundreds of people probably worked to construct and decorate them. Painting. Find Ajanta on map 7. This is a place where several caves were hollowed out of the hills over centuries. Most of these were monasteries for Buddhist monks, and some of them were decorated with paintings. Here are some examples. As the caves are dark inside, most of these paintings were done in the light of torch. The colors, which was vivid even after 1500 years, were made of plants and minerals. The artists who created these splendid works of arts remain unknown. The word of books. Some of the best known epics were written during this period. Epics are grand, long compositions about heroic men and women and include stories about gods. A famous Tamil epic, the Sila Padikaram, was composed by a poet named Ilango. Around 1800 years ago, it is the story of a merchant named Kovalan who lived in Puar and fell in love with a courtesan named Madhvi, neglecting his wife Kannaki. Later he and Kannaki left Puar and went to Madurai, where he was wrongly accused of theft by the court jeweler of the Pandya king. The king sentenced Kovalan to death. Kannaki, who still loved him, was full of grief and anger at this injustice and destroyed the entire city of Madurai. A description from the Sillapadikaram. Here is how the poet describes Kannaki grief. O witness of my grief, you cannot console me. It is right that your body fairer than pure gold lies unwashed here in the dust. Is it just that in the red glow of the twilight, your handsome chest framed with flower wreath lies thrown down on the bare earth, while I remain alone, helpless and abandoned to despair? Is there no God in this country? Can there be a God in a land where the sword of the king is used for the murder of innocent strangers? Is there no God? No God. Another Tamil epic, the Mani Mekalai, was composed by Satyanar around 1400 years ago. This describes the story of the daughter of Kovalan and Madhvi. These beautiful compositions were lost to scholars for many centuries till their manuscripts were rediscovered about 100 years ago. Other writers such as Kalidas, about whom you read in chapter 10, wrote in Sanskrit, recording and preserving old stories. A number of Hindu religious stories that were in circulation earlier were written down around the same time. These include the Puranas. Puran literally means old. The Puranas contain stories about gods and goddesses such as Vishnu, Shiva, Durga or Parvati. They also contain details on how they were to be worshipped. Besides, there are accounts about the creation of the world and about kings. The Puranas were written in simple Sanskrit verse and were meant to be heard by everybody, including women and Sudras who were not allowed to study the Vedas. They were probably recited in temples by priests and people came to listen to them. Two Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, had been popular for a very long time. Some of you may be familiar with these stories. The Mahabharata is about a war fought between the Kauravas and Pandavas, who were cousins. This was a war to gain control of the throne of the Kurus and their capitals, Hastinapur. The story itself was an old one, but was written down in the form in which we know it today about 1500 years ago. But the Puranas and the Mahabharata are supposed to have been compiled by Vyas. The Bhagavad Gita, about which you learnt in chapter 9, was also included in the Mahabharata. The Ramayana is about Ram, a prince of Koshala who was sent into exile. His wife Sita was abducted by the king of Lanka named Ravan, and Ram had to fight a battle to get her back. He won and returned to Ayodhya, the capital of Koshala, after his victory. Like Mahabharata, this was an old story that was now written down. Valmiki is recognized as the author of the Sanskrit Ramayana. Stories told by ordinary people. Ordinary people also told stories, composed poems and songs, sang, danced and performed plays. Some of these are preserved in collections of stories such as the Jatakas and the Panchatantra, which were written down around this time. Stories from the Jatakas were often shown on the railings of stupas and in paintings in places such as Ajanta. Here is one such story. The story of the Monkey King. Once upon a time there was a great monkey king who lived on the banks of the Ganga in the Himalayas. With 80,000 followers, they fed on the fruit of a special mango tree which were very sweet. Such exquisite mangoes did not grow on the plains. One day a ripe mango fell into the river and floated all the way to Varanasi. There the king of the city, who was bathing in the river, found it and was amazed when he tasted it. He asked the foresters of his kingdom whether they could find the tree for him, and they led him all the way to the Himalayas. There the king and his courtiers had their fill of mangoes. At night the king discovered that the monkeys were also feasting on the fruit and decided to kill them. However, the king of the monkeys worked out a plan to save his followers. He broke off branches of the mango trees and tied them to form a bridge across the river and held on to one end till all his followers crossed over. Exhausted with the effort, he fell down and lay dying. The human king saw what had happened and tried unsuccessfully to revive the monkey. When he died, the king mourned his death and paid him full respect. This story is shown on a piece of the sculpture found from a stupa at Bharat in central India. Can you identify which parts of the story are shown in the sculpture? Writing books on science. This was also the time when Aryabhat, a mathematician and astronomer, wrote a book in Sanskrit known as the Aryabhatiam. He stated that day and night were caused by the rotation of the earth on its axis. Even though it seems as if the sun is rising and setting every day, he developed a scientific explanation for eclipse as well. He also found a way of calculating the circumference of a circle, which is nearly as accurate as the formula we use today. Varahamihira, Brahmagupta and Bhaskaracharya were some other mathematicians and astronomers who made several discoveries. Try and find out more about them. 0. While numerals had been used earlier, mathematicians in India now invented a special symbol for 0. This system of counting was adapted by the Arabs and then spread to Europe. It continues to be in use throughout the world. Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a well-known system of health science that was developed in ancient India. The two famous practitioners of Ayurveda in ancient India were Charak, 1st-2nd centuries, and Susruta, 4th centuries. Charak Samhita, written by Charak, is a remarkable book on medicine. In his treatise Susruta Samhita, Susruta speaks about elaborate surgical procedures.